Mr. Amorim.
Thank you very much, Suri, and of course, I want to greet all the other members of the panel, especially our chair, co-chair, Ruth Dreyfus, under whose guidance we work. Of course, it was said before, this report was agreed by consensus. There may have been nuances here and there, but it is a consensus document, and it was presented to the Secretary General of the United Nations with that underlining that point, and the Secretary General welcomed it. I think this is very important to signal. It's a very complex report with several parts, as many people will see, as most people will be able to see. I will just concentrate on one aspect, which was the one aspect that I thought I would not say make a difference, but at least have some knowledge, which is the question of TRIPS flexibility and TRIPS plus provisions to some extent. And that for good reason. I was, well, of course, this room is totally new to me, but I was ambassador here to the old GATT when the TRIPS agreement was accepted. I had great reluctance in accepting it, I must say, and the Brazilian Congress had great reluctance in accepting it because it imposed many restrictions on our capacity of industrializing ourselves, and not only limited to the pharmaceutical field. But in the end, we thought we could not stay out of the world, and so we did see. I still remember, I'm trying to be very brief, I still remember when the end of the discussion on the TRIPS group came out. It was headed by a Swedish ambassador, Lars Anell, and I had an advisor who is now ambassador somewhere, I don't know, Mr. Piragibe, and I remember how disappointed and discouraged we were. And I had to point out to him, well, Mr. Piragibe, we still have some ambiguities, maybe we'll be able to work on that. And he told me, well, but we'll lose. Wherever it comes with ambiguity, the stronger will show their force and we'll lose. Well, but of course, as it happens in the world, the evolution of the society and the problems, and especially, I would say, HIV/AIDS, and the forces that were unleashed by the epidemics of HIV/AIDS changed a little bit the political situation. When the Uruguay round was launched, and I signed the Uruguay round, so I'm not speaking against it necessarily. So when the Uruguay round was launched, it was really for the globalization of capitalism, to make sure that there would be no restrictions to profit and to the work of the multinational companies. But, of course, in a multilateral setting, there are always discussions. We could here and there, and I won't go into the technical detail because Mr. Correa knows much more than I do, but we were able here and there to put some provisos, well, maybe this, maybe that. And what happened because of this evolution that I mentioned, especially in the last decade of the 20th century, because of HIV/AIDS, the political situation in the world to some extent changed. And we felt that directly because Brazil was brought to court, so to say, by the United States concerning our law, our patent law. And in the end, they had to give up because they saw that it was not so easy. And somehow those ambiguities, and that's probably the biggest step forward that the TRIPS, the Doha Declaration means, these ambiguities became flexibilities. So they were somehow accepted as established flexibilities. They were no longer ambiguities, so they could no longer be used against us, against developing countries, against countries with the need, or other countries for that matter, but in that case mainly developing countries. And that's what we have in the Doha Declaration. I don't want to, all of you are familiar with the Doha Declaration, but I think it's useful to remind of one specific paragraph, which is paragraph 4. I won't mention paragraph 6, which is still under some polemics, but paragraph 4 says, we agree that the TRIPS agreement does not and should not prevent members from taking measures to protect it. That's very important. It does not and should not. So it's both the factual and let us say the prescriptive. Should not prevent members from taking measures to protect public health. Accordingly, while treating reiterating the commitment to the TRIPS agreement, we affirm that the agreement can and should, again, the existence and the prescription, can and should be interpreted and implemented in a manner supportive of WTO members' right to protect public health and in particular to promote access to medicines to all. So really I think this is the core. Of course, paragraph 6 is important for the countries that didn't have the capacity to produce. There's another matter, but in any case, this is the core of the declaration. So I found that my main role was to recall that, because there were, of course, many good ideas to improve on the language, but I have seen many times, whenever we try to improve on the language, in the end, we lose what we had gotten. That was a very specific situation. I have to tell you that we got, not only because we had this very strong lobby of people infected with HIV/AIDS, or the community that were preoccupied with HIV/AIDS, but there was also another factor, which was September 11. The United States needed desperately to have the launching of the Doha round in order to avoid the accumulation of the economic crisis. And this is why this thing, which appeared to be the most difficult, was the first to be accepted in Doha. I negotiated that personally, so I know more or less the meaning of each word and why it is there. And in the end of the negotiation, it was myself for developing countries and the US negotiated for the developing countries. And that was the negotiation that we arrived, and I think this was of extreme importance. So that's, and of course, many people say, well, but it has not been applied, it has been invoked once or twice, and so 8 minutes, okay, I need 2 or 3 more. It's a long story, you know, I'm trying to make it as short as possible. So, it was used not very often. Well, why? This is not a technical thing. It's not because of lack of technical possibilities. Of course, technical things also play into it, and I think it is one of the roles that UNITAID can play because of the area of for intervention that was approved, is to help technically to work on that, to see if patents are really new, representing innovation, and cases that are liable to compulsory license. But the main problem is a political problem. The countries that have tried to use it have been under incredible political pressure, and what I tried all the time to show to my colleagues in the panel even is that the WTO is impotent to resolve that problem. So that's why it can criticize, it can appear, because what we got here was somehow an exemption from trade retaliations within WTO. We couldn't get more than that. That was the main objective. And that's why I think you'll see if you read the goal number 3 of the SDGs or other declarations in several fora, people agreeing. But when it comes to trade, then they abandon that. And they use, if they cannot bring to retaliate in the WTO, they use bilateral, plurilateral agreements. And that's why I want to mention that, in my opinion, the most important, and the language is very strong, the most important paragraph in the recommendations of the high-level panel is in 2.6, recommendations that relate to IP, and to the chapeau, actually, when it says World Trade Organization, WTO, members should commit themselves at the highest political level. So that would not be anyone, not just a trade minister, not a delegate in the Human Rights Council, but the highest political level, to respect the letter and the spirit of the Doha Declaration on TRIPS and Health and Public Health, refraining from any action that will limit their implementation and use in order to promote access to health technology. And then more specifically it says what we can do. Why I'm saying all that? Because this is really the crux of the matter. Because if the countries don't, if the presidents or prime ministers don't put their weight in respecting that agreement, it will be no technical maneuver will solve that problem. So that's my main point. Of course, there are many other important points which I don't want to. This is somehow, let us say, spelled out in more specific wording, but this is the crucial point. I think it has been the crucial point for countries that have tried to do. I don't want to mention the name of countries here, but we know that in Southeast Asia, in South America, countries suffered quite a lot of pressure from the laboratories and from governments, including with threats that went much beyond trade, threats that went much not to apply compulsory license or not apply other TRIPS flexibility. So I think this kind of commitment at the highest level, because it's already written, you must say, well, this is written, it's part of SDG 3. But anyway, it's written, but it's not respected. So at some point, we must have, as we had in climate, must have something in health with the highest possible level in which the people who are really in power are able to do that. What I'm saying now may sound, it would be utopian anyway to some extent, but we have to fight for utopia. That's the role that we have. We cannot reach, but we can always make progress. It already sounded utopian. It sounds even more utopian now, because I just read the document, which I don't know if it was approved yet, which would be the national trade policy of the biggest power, still biggest trading power in the world, in which, among other things, it is said that they should ensure U.S. owners of intellectual property have a full and fair opportunity to use and profit from the property. They should resist efforts by other countries or international bodies like the WTO to weaken these rights and benefits, and furthermore, to use all possible sources of leverage, all sources. Would that include military force? I don't know. All sources of leverage to encourage other countries to open their markets to U.S. exports of goods and services and protect U.S. intellectual property rights. So what I'm going to say now, just to finish, what is at stake here is not only the question of intellectual property and the right to medicine, which is of course essential, is the whole future of multilateralism. And that's really is in the hands of the people. Of course, you have many systems to concretely examine, like the trade policy review, in which you can see if these pressures are being applied contrary to what was established. You have other even the Human Rights Council should have some sort of review in which these questions could be brought. But anyway, all that is dependent on a premise, on an assumption. An assumption is that we want to reinforce the multilateral system. I don't know if that assumption still holds. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Amorim. It's really a privilege to hear firsthand from somebody who was so centrally involved in the construction of the institutions we rely on today. Perhaps during the discussion we can get into a bit more detail also about some of the recommendations that focus very much on the WTO, including raising some of the pressures that you mentioned through the trade policy review process, as well as asking members to report when they are subject to undue pressure. Our next speaker will be Ambassador Didonet from the Permanent Mission to Brazil, while we await the arrival of the Ambassador